Hello, everyone. So again, this is Emmanuel Zige with FileOpen, and we'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, How to Share Files Securely Anytime, Anywhere. Now, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to type them into the Q&A pod, and we'll be answering as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our moderators for today. We have our Vice President of Sales, Elizabeth Murphy, with us. And we also have our CEO, Sanford Bingham. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Elizabeth and hand the call over to her.
Well, great. Thank you, Emmanuel. What we're going to be discussing today is how to work effectively when being effective requires that we share sensitive, valuable information that we need to distribute, but we don't want to lose control over. What we need is a way to work effectively, but without the risk of compromising security. We're going to be looking at the FileOpen solution by achieving productivity by easily sharing information, but retaining control over that information at all times. Then we're going to transition from the theory to a live demo, so you can see that process in operation, and you can see exactly how the security is achieved, and just as importantly, what the end-user experience will be. Following that, we'll have a Q&A session, as Emmanuel mentioned. Okay. So what information does your company need to share? In any organization, there will be scenarios where potentially sensitive information needs to be shared, very often with third parties, but often within the organization itself. Many of our clients have valuable IP information which they need to share, for example, with investors or with third parties, with banking organizations. But obviously that IP information cannot get out into the public domain. Otherwise the IP itself is open to vulnerabilities and exposure. One of the companies attending this webinar, for example, has a product which extends the viability of the human organ for donations to recipients who may be in need of, say, a heart transplant. Without wanting to put you off your lunch, what they've achieved is a product which will extend the lifespan of that organ so that recipients have a better chance of receiving a live organ. But in order to disseminate the information about the product that they have, they need to share that with third parties external to the organization. And they need to be able to do that, securing the confidence that only the intended parties can actually view those documents, and that even though they have extended that information outside of the company's firewall, they can control and retain the ability to access that information and control it at all times. Another usage of our functionality is to stop data loss. So organizations can be secure that if they share information either internally or externally, they have the ultimate control over who views that document, when they view the document, and how often and for the duration that that document can be accessed. In today's world, we're also seeing a lot of pressure to achieve due diligence and compliance. You may be familiar with the new Omnibus HIPAA law, which mandates widespread controls over who can access documents and the access controls over those documents once they've been disseminated. It means that organizations are under more and more pressure to comply with laws and to be applying due diligence to the way in which they operate. Thank you, Magna. So we all probably have a little bit of a chuckle when we see this information in the news, and very often it may be that we're looking at this information thinking, well, there, for the grace of God, go all of us. Because the reality is that it's all too simple to disseminate information digitally. It's all too easy to forward that odd email or to pick up a document and replicate it, or to take, for example, a PDF and do a save as to another PDF, or to do screen capture, or to print it to a virtual printer or to a bona fide printer, but create a new version and then just scan that document and feed it back into the digital process. So here's some examples of what's gone horribly wrong in the news. And here we can see that all too often, once the information is out in the public domain, there really is no going back. There's no remedying this scenario once it's happened. So we've looked at what the consequences are of not protecting information, and I think we'd all agree that doesn't look too pretty. We've got exposure all over the news, our corporate name is being dragged through the gutter press, it's all too embarrassing. So why aren't people applying more restrictions and more controls over the documents? Well, the answer to that is it's not that easy to do, and in the past it's been fraught with all sorts of complications. If we look at our chap here who looks rather unhappy, we can see that he's facing a number of pain points in trying to apply due diligence and proper protection over the corporate information. One of the key areas of concern was that passwords aren't secure. If you give somebody a password and they pass that password on, then the security is completely undone. Also, passwords don't scale, and if you've got an enterprise organization where you've got several thousand users, internal and external, you don't want to be managing passwords for each of those users. DRM has also in the past been a very difficult subject for end users, and we're going to look at in the demo at what the end user experience will be. Because DRM is a product where the end user experience is just as important as the security that you can apply to a document. You have to have the document accessed by people who don't have to jump through hurdles in order to access it. You have to make that end user experience viable and easy and a pleasant experience. Otherwise, people will opt simply not to open the documents. Another challenge with DRM is that it can be too expensive. In the past, this has involved very often installing the software on servers, having programmers, having internal IT resources in order to maintain the DRM product. FileOpen offers some very quick and easy solutions that don't require servers, don't require IT involvement, don't require programmers. Solutions that can be implemented within 1 or 2 hours, giving you instant control and access over distributing your information. Another key problem in the past has been that viewers and devices keep changing. And at FileOpen we're only too aware of this because we put a lot of time and effort into developing our Blackberry solution, only to have it surpassed immediately by the iPad. So it's a constant challenge to keep up with the kind of devices that users want to be able to access information on. I think everybody in the industry, apart from perhaps Steve Jobs himself, was surprised at how much the iPad has infiltrated corporate business. I speak to a lot of CTOs who say they are amazed, even in the legal sector, to see lawyers and people within that industry using the iPad instead of the BlackBerry as was once used. So as an organization, we need to face these challenges, and we need to constantly come up with easy access for our end users to those documents, regardless of which devices they want to access those documents on. So since 1997, we have been the pioneers of providing the ultimate security in DRM, but with easy end user access. We were the first Adobe Business Security partner. In fact, we introduced the concept of encrypting PDFs to Adobe. We have the widest platform in terms of the accessibility across the widest IT platform, and we also have the widest footprint in the DRM sector worldwide. We have over 1,700 users, clients worldwide, with millions and millions of end users accessing encrypted documents every single year. Needless to say, our customer base goes across all industry sectors. Wherever an organization has sensitive information that it wants to protect, FileOpen can provide a solution. So what is our strategy? Our strategy is to provide the ultimate DRM security with the easiest end-user experience. And what that requires is providing a cost-effective solution. It's no good offering the ultimate security if it's going to be price prohibitive. It's no good offering the ultimate security if your end users hate the very experience of accessing those documents. So what we provide is a way that's very secure, very cost-effective, doesn't require a huge IT involvement. In fact, in our Rights Manager hosted product, there is no IT involvement required at all. But we also provide portable access. So if an end user wants to open the document on an iPhone or an iPad or their Android, they can do so with the security still embedded in that document. We also support standard viewers and formats, so we not only support the Adobe Reader, but we also support Nuance and Foxit and Bluebeam, so that the user has a wide variety of viewers that they can choose to use to access their documents. FileOpen's strategy is to provide as much openness as possible in terms of securing documents and also enabling access to those documents. We support the encryption of PDF documents, but also MS Office documents. So you can share, for example, Excel spreadsheets and have the users interact with those spreadsheets, use those spreadsheets in an effective and realistic business fashion. But the metadata and the calculations regarding those spreadsheets are still protected so that the IP behind a spreadsheet is still protected and secured by the publisher. So I mentioned earlier that we have clients across every industry sector, and I think this slide here in the presentation lends to that, because as you can see, we've got clients in manufacturing, we've got clients in services, we've got clients in entertainment, for example, Disney. These clients also have a very diverse usage of the software within their organization. For example, if you look over to the right of the slide, there's an organization called Final Draft. And when I first heard of this company, I thought they produced wills, but in fact, they're in the movie business and they produce software for writing scripts. Now, you're probably aware of the old adage that where there is a script, there's a writ, but Final Draft has implemented FileOpen technology to put an end to that adage by protecting those scripts from being reproduced and transferred to people who should not have access to them. Then we also have clients such as Pfizer who use the software to protect auditing information that goes around the whole of Pfizer enterprise. We have companies such as Embraer, who you may be familiar with, and if you fly and you see on the back of the seat the security instructions very often reference Embraer as an aircraft component manufacturer. Then we have clients such as ANSI, the American National Standards, and indeed most of the national standards throughout the world use our technology to protect the revenue from the documents they sell. We also have clients such as Euromoney who produce research information into the financial sector. And for them, when they release that information, they only want that to go to people who have actually purchased it so that their revenue isn't diluted by the documents being forwarded to unauthorized users. So as you can see, there's a wide, diverse range of clients who use our technology, and they're using it for a very diverse range of applications. So the workflow, if we're looking at the workflow of protecting documents, ultimately what we want to do is to protect and restrict the unauthorized transfer of documents to people who you do not want to have access to those documents. That's the number one asset that we have in our functionality is that we have bulletproof security to ensure that when you distribute a document, you retain control over who sees that document and what they do with that document and for how long they have access to that document. So the number one functionality that we provide is complete security over the content of your document and the distribution of those documents. But we have to combine that and we have to marry that up with a user-friendly environment. There's no point having documents that are so secure and so locked down that the users simply cannot access them because it's too arduous a process. So we provide a very friendly end-user experience to accessing those documents with no need for passwords if you don't want to use passwords, with only one-time authentication per device that the user accesses the documents on. That results in the ability to securely share information because you have to have the two things combined with security and end-user accessibility. And once you have that successfully combined, then you can distribute your documents securely and with confidence that they will only be accessed by people who have authority to do so. So file open solutions range from very simplistic but highly secure products to very complex server-side applications that can integrate with any application that you might have running in your organization. If clients are looking for a very simple solution that can be up and running within 1 or 2 hours, that doesn't require any integration with third-party products, then we would recommend the Rights Manager product. Now, even though it's a hosted permission server, that means when the user calls home to the permission server is in the cloud, or it's actually in New Jersey, the encryption is always held locally. So you always have control over your documents at all times. There is no requirement to upload your documents unsecured to anybody. You can encrypt them locally on your PCs and then secure them and distribute them as you want to. What happens then is when the user goes to access that document, there's a call home to a permission server which is already built, which replicates the permissions that you have dictated in your local administration console. And then that permission server checks whether the user actually has access and authority to access that document. And if they do have access to that document, then the controls that you've implemented then come into play, so you can decide what the user can do with the document and for how long they can access it. You can also change those controls dynamically. So for example, if you distribute a document to a member of staff who is then terminated, you can then terminate access to those documents dynamically. Alternatively, if you want to manage version control and you have distributed a document, you can then retire the previous document and update it with the newest up-to-date version. Additionally, we offer the same functionality but running on-premise. And what this means is that you can integrate with any application in your environment to create a completely seamless workflow process. So you can, for example, integrate with Active Directory. So your authentication is all through a single sign-on using Active Directory with no need to re-authenticate for the file open permission server. This is an enterprise solution and it's being used by very complex multinational applications worldwide, where there may be some multiple servers running across different locations in different nations using a number of different applications all integrated to ensure that the endpoint solution of delivering the document to the endpoint is still 100% secure. In addition to that, the on-premise solution is highly customizable. So there is a toolkit that comes with the product that enables you to add any kind of customization to make sure that the workflow is completely appropriate with the dynamics and the requirements of your specific organization. Okay, so we talked a little bit about providing ultimate security. How do we do that? Well, obviously we control who has access to the documents, but in addition to that, we can dynamically revoke access to those documents at any time. We can also apply a watermark so that if you do allow printing, the identity of the user is printed onto that document. And we do find that people are less likely to distribute documents without authority if they have culpability in doing so. You can automatically prevent copy and save. You can provide offline permissions if the user needs to access the document, for example, on a train or a plane where they may not have internet access. But those documents are still secured even though they're accessing them offline. You can control printing to any level that you want. So it's not just a case of saying, yes, you can print or no, you can't. You can control it right down to the page that the user prints. You can also prevent screenshot capturing, so Snippet and Snagit and all those other tools, you can prevent those from capturing the information. All of this information is then reported through a complete audit trail of any activity with the document, and that is made available to you as soon as any activity with the document occurs. So you can see any instance of the document being opened, how long it's been open for, the IP address, any information whatsoever about that document activity. So I mentioned earlier about client support, and I think it's very important for users not to feel that because they're opening an encrypted document that they're somehow restricted as to which device they can open it on. We want the experience of opening an encrypted document to be the same as opening any document, except that when you come to do something you're prohibited from doing, then obviously the encryption comes into play. So we support a number of viewers for PDFs. We also support mobile devices, and we also support PDF and MS Office documents. So at FileOpen, we've been in operation, as I mentioned, since 1997, and we have always been at the forefront of producing the most pioneering technology in DRM. And we've certainly been the first to market with a plug-in free viewer, which allows the user to access the document through the browser without having to have anything installed on their devices whatsoever other than Flash. And it may surprise you to know that you can actually open these documents in Flash on the iPad and the iPhone. We've also been at the forefront of pushing another technology using HTML5, which will give the user the ultimate experience in accessing secured information and secured documents without having to go through any hurdles or any client downloads. We've also been at the forefront of pushing the kind of viewers that the users can access the documents on. So not just restricting the users to accessing the documents on Adobe Reader. So thank you very much for listening to the presentation and attending, and I would like to hand you back now to Emmanuel, who's going to take you through to the next part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I see we have some questions rolling in and also some new attendees joining the webinar. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions during today's presentation, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A pod, and we'll be answering as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. Now, we had a chance to hear about FileOpen DRM, and I'd like to go ahead and hand over the mic to our CEO, Sanford Bingham, so that we can see FileOpen DRM in action. With that said, take it away, Sanford.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Elizabeth mentioned a number of the areas that we've been developing along, the axes that we've been working toward. And a number of those I won't be showing today. Today what I'll focus on is a very simple use case with a couple of priorities. And the priorities are that I shouldn't have to have anything installed on my machine as a publisher other than some encryption tools. I should not have to have my own server. So I'll be demonstrating the Rights Manager, our hosted application, the one, as Elizabeth pointed out, that is in New Jersey and partly also in the Amazon cloud today, some parts of it. And what I'll be showing is, let me show my screen. What I'll be showing is the ability to publish a collection of documents to a group of known users and give those users selective access, not just to the documents, but also to the listing of the documents. So what I want to do as a publisher here is distribute a collection of documents that breaks into two categories. And I want some of my users to know about one of those categories and other users to know about the other categories, and perhaps some of my users to know about all of the categories. But I want to be able to segregate both the knowledge of what documents are available and then further segregate access and log access to the documents. So I've already encrypted, and if time permits, I'll encrypt some more to demonstrate that functionality as well. But I've encrypted a collection of documents. And some of them this morning, some of them earlier. And these documents are on my machine. As Elizabeth mentioned, I encrypted them locally. I dropped them into a watched folder, and they came out into another folder, and then some other things happened. But the key point there is that the document encryption took place locally, and the documents are now available on the open web. And what I've got here is a simulation is 3 machines. 2 of them are remote, and the third one is my own here. And these 3 machines, each of which is assigned to a different user, are all accessing or able to access the same web folder, the same site, if you like. And this site itself can be customized, branded, modified to suit your own user interface guidelines. Here it will be relatively simple and have our branding, but please bear in mind that it can be branded by you. And the documents that appear for the different users are going to be different depending on who those users are. So if we look now, and I'm hoping that everybody is seeing this, if we look at the top window on the screen, this is what we call the web UI to our permission server. So the Rights Manager application, that is the hosted solution. And it's essentially a front end to a database. And in that database are listings of users and documents and policies. And there are 2 in question here. One is the Webinar 1 policy, and I'll take us through there very quickly. And we see that the Webinar 1 group contains 2 documents, one called File Open Interfaces, another called File Open Cloud. And it has 2 users who are members of that group. One of them is myself, and the other David Cole. The other group, Webinar 2, also contains 2 documents, but they're different documents, File Open DLP and Workflow Optimization, etc. And it contains 2 users, one, me, again. I'm in both groups, and it's important to bear in mind that the system is flexible in that respect. Documents can be in multiple groups, users can be in multiple groups, and there's a lot to be said around that. And if time permits, we can certainly go into some of the mechanics of how permissions are applied and users are managed and so forth. But here we have Joel and Sanford. So let's look then at what happens if Dave, and this is David Cole now on this remote desktop, if he goes to the page that contains the listing. And so here again, as I say, this is a customizable page. It can be customized through an XML template, and we can mess with that if we choose. So your logo can go here, any text you like, and so forth. So David Cole, who you'll recall was in the Webinar 1 group, he can see two documents in his listing, and those are File Open Cloud and File Open Interfaces, as you might expect. Now if we go to the other user, who is Joel, and we click the same link. This link, incidentally, is URL shortening. Actually, it's a handle server. And another thing we can go into if time permits, but it's a shortened URL that resolves to a longer URL. And when Joel goes to the same URL that David went to a moment ago, he sees two different documents. So he sees File Open DLP and Workflow Optimization, but he does not see the other two. So we have here Joel, who can see File Open Cloud, and Dave, who can see these two. Then if we go to myself here, and not that one, sorry, but this one. Because, as you may have noticed, I was in both groups, I can see more files. So I can not only see the OPN files, and I'll take a moment in just a moment to talk about what OPN is, but I can not only see the OPN files, but also the PDF files. So 3 different users going to the same URL, getting different listings based on their presence, if you like, in the database. So if we look at Joel here, we see that Joel is only in the group Webinar 2. So now let's open a document as, which one are we here? This is Dave. So if we open a document as Dave, and this is, again, an OPN document. The user interface that we see here is also customizable. The logo can be your own logo. That splash preloader animation that you saw can be replaced with your own preloader animation and so forth. It's, the UI of the viewer itself can be skinned with different colors and so forth. But a couple of things are interesting here. We think one is that when this document is opened, the content is, as Elizabeth mentioned, watermarked with information about the user that opened it. So if I open a document as me, and I've got the same document, which one is this? File Open Cloud. So if I open File Open Cloud on my machine, and now things start to get a bit confusing here because these are actually 2 different machines, but if you pay attention to the remote desktop, you can see that that's a different machine. So I'm going to log in here. And when I open the same document that was opened by Dave here at 1237, it's now 1238, and we see my name in the watermark. And it's important that to realize that the bytes of this file are the same for Dave and for myself. The difference is that when those bytes are rendered in my browser, I'm authenticated to the permission server, which recognizes me as Sanford Bingham and gives me a watermark with my name on it and the current time and date. There are 2 others here that you can sort of see, one at the bottom that has some different information, and one diagonally that's a little bit hard to read, but I'll try to zoom in on that. And that says, and these are all configurable. In fact, let's go in. Actually, before we do that, let's look and also note that there is a tracking capability here. So if we want to see which users have opened documents, we can go to Dave Cole here and look and see what he's done. And we see that these are GMT timestamps, but that Dave Cole has opened a document called File Open Cloud 130105, and that's in fact this one here, 13105. and he opened it on a specific machine from a particular IP address. We can see which documents he has access to. We can see what machines he has access from, and Dave's been doing some testing on Office and so forth, so he has a lot of machines. But key point there is that Dave can see only Dave's documents. So now what if we were to take one of Dave's documents and give it to Joel or give it to myself and vice versa? So we could, for example, go into the Webinar 1 group and see that there is this File Open Cloud document, and that this document is in the group Webinar 1. But if for some reason we did that wrong and now we want that to be in the Webinar 2 group, not in the Webinar 1 group, we can change its presence. And now if Dave tries to open that document again, we should see Dave be prompted because his machine is not registered. When we tell him who it is, we can't get back in. So Dave has been banished from the group. If we go back to FOPN webinar, here we see that that document is no longer present in his listing. Now let's go into this policy set and look at the watermarks that we can modify and some of the permissions that we can change here. When a document is opened, and this is true in our model to first order everywhere, in the SDK environment, in our rights manager environment, in our rights server environment, there is a set of client-server interactions that go on either between one of the binary clients or plug-in for Adobe Reader or for Foxit Reader, Nuance, and so forth, our Microsoft Office add-ins for Office 2007, 10, and 13, our implementations of our library and other applications like Final Draft, for example, and others that are in development now. There is a protocol that we expose, and that protocol has a number of elements, and the primary one is an attempt to open the document. But before that document open event happens, or while that document open event is happening, the user needs to be identified to the server. The user has to first order, register a machine with the permission server. And we can control at a relatively fine-grained level what information is analyzed at the server in order to determine what user environment is making the request, so that the server can associate that user environment with a particular user account. Users may have multiple machines. Users may have, a desktop, a laptop, an iPad, an Android device, or some combination of the two. So we have a number of different ways of identifying those users. We have the ability to link that user authentication step to external databases, principally Active Directory, but also we can inherit a login cookie from a portal. If there's a pre-existing login, we can inherit credentials from other systems, either Active Directory or some other database. If username passwords have already been issued to users, we can import those into our permission server database. And there are some other things that we can do that may be of interest, having to do with, for example, limiting the number of users who can access a particular document at a particular time. For each document that is, or for each user machine combination that is authorized to open a document, the actual document open event then incurs, if you like, a set of permission policies, or a permission policy that has a set of permissions. And this is where things like expiration can be enabled or disabled. Print can be turned on or off. The usual the so-called PD-perm values are supported. We can allow modification of the document, editing of the document, saving of changes, and so on. As Elizabeth mentioned, we can grant offline permission, and the offline permission can be different from the online permission. For example, it can be permitted to print only online and not print while offline. The offline permission can be treated as a secondary sort of backup permission, what we call inverted mode, so that it's only used in the case where the user is actually offline, the machine is offline. And there are some additional permissions that involve things like blocking individual pages of the document and controlling screen capture. And screen capture is a topic really all unto itself. Has to do, there are different implementations in the different code bases that we have. There's one low-level implementation that works in the PDF Adobe Reader world, where we're actually blocking screen capture at the kernel level in Ring 0, and then there are other screen capture technologies in the Flash viewer that will control, that will blur the screen. I think I can show you that in a moment. But let's just, as an experiment here, go into this watermark policy and say that we've decided first that we're going to change the text of the watermark, and in this case it'll be the header. And if we go back to any of these, I guess, but let's go to me. I've got this, oh, there, if you notice that blurring was the screen capture prevention. So I've got a watermark now that says opened at a particular time by a particular user, and it says that because this policy tells it to, opened on date by first name, last name, and so on. So if we were to say, let's change that watermark, we wanted to say opened by first name, last name, email, company on the particular date, and we save that change back into the database, into the template. And I then, by the way, I'll just do that right now. The reason it's blurring is because we're blocking screen capture of this. So what we're doing is making it the case that if you try to capture the document, you get a degraded version of that document. So now if I reload this document, we will see that the watermark now says opened by Sanford Bingham, company name, on this particular date. We can also do things like change the appearance of this watermark. If we go into the header now, and we say that instead of being 10-point gray, we're going to make it red. So we'll call this, we'll just leave 128. We'll make these two 0. So if green and blue are 0 and red is 128, then we should see when we reload this document again, that now we have a header watermark that is red. We can, again, revoke documents. We can expire documents or embargo documents. And we can give different permissions to the same document to different users based on their identity. And as Elizabeth mentioned, the technology that we're showing here, which is our current 0 install offering, and it is 0 install for users who have Adobe Flash on their machine. There is an install required for users on iOS or Android, and there is in the App Store for Apple and the Google Play Store for Android an application called File Open Viewer, and the behavior of that application is to first order identical to what you just saw here on the desktop. That is to say the documents open for the same user credentials, or the machines can be registered through a registration document mechanism that I don't think we'll have time to talk about. And the same watermarks appear, and the same logging is maintained at the server. The same controls can be imposed. But as the timeline showed, we're on our way to a world where zero install really is zero install, and we recognize that Flash is not truly a zero install environment, but it is a very widely installed environment. We expect that in time that users, that the presence of the penetration of HTML5 browsers will become sufficient to eliminate the need to use Flash as a delivery mechanism, and we do actually look forward to that day, as we now have, at least in preliminary testing and not quite yet integrated into the full application set that you've been seeing, a viewer that renders secure documents with watermarks and the same controls that we've been talking about natively in the HTML5 browser, so that you can have a publishing system that addresses essentially the entire universe of connected machines, either through HTML5, or if the user's machine is not capable of rendering HTML5, we can degrade or fail over, if you like, the display into Flash, and if Flash itself is not present, then we can fail that down to PDF in Adobe Reader or Foxit, Nuance, or any of the others. Let me stop there and hand it back to Emmanuel, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may have come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanford, for that live demo. So it looks like we have a few minutes for Q&A, and I really wish we had more time because we're getting some great questions for Sanford and Elizabeth. But if we can't get to your question now, we'll be sure to answer them via email. So without further ado, we have a question from Sue Barnes. She asks, she's interested in lapsing reports after a particular date. How does this work for the end user?
Sure. So in our policy here, we'll go to either one, webinar one, we have, as I mentioned, this permission policy, and the permission policy contains the logic for expiration. And expiration can take any of several forms. It can be based on usage. This document may only be opened 3 times. And that's 3 times on any given machine. So if a user has 2 machines, a desktop or an iPad, it would be 3 times on each. In principle, it could be 3 times globally across all devices. That would take a little tweaking in the database. It's normally done at the document level, or rather at the machine level. Also, we can expire documents in either a relative manner or an absolute manner, relative being X period from the first access. So if we say, we have milliseconds, seconds, hours, days, weeks, quarters, and years. So you can say that this document may be opened by this user for 1 month from the first time it is opened by that user, and after 1 month, if the user attempts to open it, the permission server will refuse to grant that permission. The same can be done, by the way, in offline permission, where the permissions are stored locally, and after 1 month, the user would no longer be able to open that document offline, would have to come back to the server, and then it depends on whether the server is going to renew permissions or not. And the other absolute involves specification of a particular date. It's in here somewhere. Here, expiration is absolute, and we can specify a date on which the document is no longer accessible. And when the user attempts to open the document after that date, an error message, which is a customizable error message, and there are a set of strings in the permission server that you can put your phone number into or any message you like, and the users will see in the PDF viewer or the OPN viewer or either the handheld viewers the message that the server sends.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question comes from Jen Ellis, and she asks, do you integrate with Active Directory?
Yes, we do, and that was, we pass, as we are opening the document, a set of identifiers about the local machine. And there's some differences here in the way this is implemented between the interpreted browser-based technologies, Flash and HTML5, and the installed binary technologies. And true Active Directory integration is better done through the installed binaries, because in that scenario, we've got, if you like, when the user attempts to open the document, the user's credentials, principally what's known as the SID, the security identifier that Windows assigns to a particular login to a particular machine. And we can obtain that data locally from the machine and pass it to the server. And the server can then make an external call to Active Directory, passing that user's identifier, and get back from the Active Directory the groups, the Active Directory groups of which that user is a member, and then map those groups to the groups in the file open permission server in order to determine whether that user should have access or not. So it is possible to integrate tightly with Active Directory so that all user credentials are stored in the Active Directory and accessed via web services by the file open permission server. This can be done certainly in the right server environment. It's a little more complicated to do in the rights manager, the hosted environment. And that normally is okay because the rights manager should best be thought of as a publishing system in which you're distributing documents into other people's environments where you may not have any access to their.
Great. So our next question.
As it is in internal document control scenarios where you do have a listing, a forest that contains information about all the users.
Great. So our next question comes from Matthew Johnson, and he asks, how long does it take to get up and running with your solution?
Well, it's there's an install of I promised that I would encrypt the documents. Let me do that. I have here a watch folder. I'll just drop a document in there and let that go while we talk. There's an installation of this encryption tool set, which takes 10 minutes or thereabouts. You pull down an MSI, you run it. You give it the credentials, and in this rights manager scenario, there is then already at that point a database that's been assigned, that's been registered for those credentials. So there's a certain amount of learning curve to get comfortable with these policies and set up the groups and permissions that you want. But once those are set up, the installation of the encryption tools just takes a few minutes, and then the creation of a document involves merely dropping it into a watched folder. And in this case, by the way, it's coming out into another watch folder, which you can see is actually my Dropbox. And the files that we were looking at before up here are actually being accessed via Dropbox, and the same can be done with SkyDrive or G Drive or Box or any number of other cloud storage mechanisms. And there's a little bit more complexity if you want to do that, but let's just say you can get set up with all this in the morning.
Well, I think so far the gold medal has gone to a company that did it in just under 20 minutes. But we have more gold medals to hand out for anybody who wants to try and better that time record.
Great. So our last question comes from Mark Mandel, and he asks, can I get a copy of the presentation slides as either a PDF or a PowerPoint file after the meeting? And the answer to that question is yes. We will be sending out both a copy of the presentation as a PDF file as well as a recording of today's presentation. And with that said, we're all out of time. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I'd like to also thank Elizabeth and Sanford for their presentations. We look forward to hearing from you, and we wish you a great day.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all.
Thank you.